Hello there, I'm Miss Amber, and I'm here with your reading resources and selections for English 11A. In the last video, we went over Sinners of an Angry God, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God from colonial literature. So we're moving on to the reading selections for the next lesson, which is Poetry in the Age of Reason. So this is the fourth lesson in Unit 1. There are 4 reading selections, but most of them are not very long at all. It's just that the older language, I think, makes it a little difficult to get into it and parse it, but that's what this video is here for. So the point is to go over some of the readings and make sure that we translate it into sort of like modern day understanding so that you guys can get through the lesson and at least have an idea of like what the general gist of those texts are. So I'm going to go ahead and start. We're just going to dive in. I'm going to share my screen. Today we are only going over the first reading selection from this lesson, which is A Speech to the Congressional Convention by Benjamin Franklin. Now, this lesson starts by giving you some context and detail for the time period, right? So they start by letting you know that there's a difference between the colonial literature that was very heavily based in religion and the Age of Reason, which emphasized like good, solid arguments. So they give you a little bit of background on this, and they let you know that until the 1760s, separation from Great Britain was not an idea that colonists considered at the time. They really only considered it because King George III and Parliament started putting a lot of regulations and taxes, and the American colonists who were doing all this work to cultivate the land in America, they felt like these things violated their rights. So they were like, well, if the crown is just gonna take advantage of us, then we should be able to just exist on our own and reap the benefits of our own hard work. Like they didn't mind giving back to the crown a little bit because it's due to some of the resources from Britain that that American colonists were able to come here in the first place. But when the rules and the taxes started getting, like a little too much, it was interfering with people's ability to actually survive. They basically decided that they didn't want to be under a system that would exploit them that much, right? So this is what led to the eruption of the American Revolution in 1775. And if you're looking at this, the mid 1760s to 1775, that's only 15 years. So the state of war developed fairly quickly. And then down here is when they get into the differences, right, between the types of writing. So 17th century or in the 1600s, writing from that time had inspired people from the Age of Reason. The Age of Reason is basically the time in which the Constitution and lots of other logical type arguments were the main thing dominating. So when you think of any of the things that Benjamin Franklin wrote, when you think of the preamble for the Constitution, you think of Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, all of those sort of speeches that had that like very high class, complex vocabulary sort of sound. This is pretty much the time period where people were writing like that. And this is very different from the religious writings of the Puritans. Very specifically, writers during the era, they valued reason, order, and moderation over faith. They wanted to use sound and logical arguments. So sound means well-built, sturdy. They used well-built, good, well-rounded arguments that were logical because they wanted things to be reasonable and to be in order. Now, from their perspective, they did this because there are lots of different types of Christianity, right? You have people who were Catholic, you had the Puritans, you had Protestants. Ever since Britain split, had their own like English church, the Anglican Church split away from the Catholic Church, there were all kinds of denominations for Christianity. So they did mention God in their works. They respected God as like an overarching guiding force. Um, and sometimes they did it because they knew it would help make their writing persuasive. But they didn't really talk about the afterlife. They didn't really talk about guilt through religion in that same way. And part of the reason why that is because with everyone believing in different smaller, like groups and sects of the religion, it would be easier to push people away if you weren't catering specifically to what they believed in. But everyone did agree that God existed as a driving force. So it was important for them to include the references to God because that's what would help bring people together. That's how they decided to be persuasive. So instead of focusing on the afterlife, they focused on defining and pursuing a better government and society. So they would mention God because they felt like they were doing the right thing and that any God who was righteous would support what they were doing. But they wanted to have logic that everyone could get behind. So like if you're, Episcopalian or Pentecostal, right, and you're seeing like Baptist rhetoric and teachings or references, you're going to think, oh, well, that doesn't include me because I don't believe in that, right? So they focused on their arguments being logical because things that make sense are usually things that everyone can get behind regardless of your religious beliefs. They would mention God to sort of like rope people in or reassure them that they were doing things for the right reason. But the focus was, you should side with us because we're making sense. This is the right thing to do. This just is logical. Now, this first section that we have to read is the speech to the Constitutional Convention. So this is a tricky one that I'm filming the video for today. So I realized that there is an issue with this link. I've submitted a support ticket to Edmentum. So you can test this link and see if it leads to a source where you can read this, but it may not, depending on when you are watching this video. I have another source here and I will put it up on screen so that you can follow along both while I'm reading and so that if you, want to write down or, like copy the URL so that you can access it yourself, you can also do that. You should be able to see my whole screen. So when I pull it up, you should be fine. To copy it, type it into the URL bar up here and go to it if you want to follow along. This is like a safe, vetted website. There shouldn't be any issues with that. But if you feel uncomfortable, you can just follow along by watching the video while I'm reading through it. I tend to highlight things when we're going over them. So that shouldn't be a problem. This is a quote from the speech. I'm not going to read through it in its entirety just because it's repeated in the speech to the Constitutional Convention. So we would be reading it twice, and we're probably going to read over it more than once already just to go over and make sure that we know what everything means. So I'm just going to actually go over to this tab here. And this website actually has the speech in its entirety. Now, I know that this looks like a lot right now, but there's not very much more. There's literally this. There's 2 paragraphs that are quite big, and then this small conclusion here. So they give you a little context at the top here. Speech to the Constitutional Convention on adoption of the new Constitution. So that means when you adopt something, you take it in, you claim it as yours. So this is a speech that he made on the last day. They give you some information here. The last day of the Constitutional Convention. Too weak to actually give the speech himself, James Wilson actually delivered the speech on Benjamin Franklin's behalf. The following version comes from James Madison's notes on the convention from the 17th of September, 1787. So Benjamin Franklin wrote this, but he's not the person who delivered it, who said it. Okay, so it starts with Mr. President. So we know who he's addressing. He's addressing George Washington. And I do think that it's important to note that George Washington was, in fact, basically elected as president before the Constitution was completely ratified. Part of this was because of the American Revolution. They needed someone to lead them in terms of war, and it just wouldn't make sense to wait for the Constitution to be approved before organizing for war, because the British could attack them, like at any time once things got started. So that's what that reference is from. So here we go. I confess, so that means like I admit, or I will say, I confess that there are several parts of this Constitution which I do not at present approve, but I am not sure I shall never approve them. So that, pretty much self-explanatory, right? He doesn't currently approve at the time of, or there's some things that he doesn't approve of in the Constitution, but he says he's not sure that he would never approve them. So he admits that maybe eventually he would change. For having lived long, I have experienced many instances or times of being obliged by better information or fuller consideration to change opinions even on important subjects, which I once thought right, but found to be otherwise. So found to be otherwise, he's basically saying that he's been pushed by getting more information or more consideration to change his opinion on things. So he's saying he really does think it's possible that he might approve of some of the things that he doesn't like about the Constitution right now. It is therefore that the older I grow, the more apt I am to doubt my own judgment and pay more respect to the judgment of others. So again, self-explanatory. As he gets older, he, like, more apt means that he is more in a habit to, it's more fitting for him to doubt his own judgment and pay more attention to the judgment of others. So he's saying as he's gotten older, he values other people's opinions more. Most men indeed, as well as most sects of religion, think themselves in possession of all truth, and that wherever others differ from them, it is so far error. So he's making this point that a lot of people are religious, and they think that if people don't believe the exact same thing to a T that he does, that those people are wrong. And he's pointing that out to imply that he's not like that, basically. So Steele, a Protestant in a dedication, tells the Pope that the only difference between our churches and their opinions of the certainty of their doctrine is the Church of Rome is infallible and the Church of England is never in the wrong. So he's basically saying, that as an example of religious people thinking that they are never wrong, he says the only difference is that the Church of Rome is infallible, right? And the Church of England is never to be wrong. If you look at these words, infallible means nothing, it's flawless, right? Infallible means it can never fail. So the Church of Rome thinks they're infallible, and the Church of England is never in the wrong, right? So he's saying they're using different words to say the same thing. He's just using like kind of a clever joke to say that they both are exactly the same. The difference between the Church of Rome and the Church of England is that the Church of Rome is infallible, which means they're never wrong, and that the Church of England is never in the wrong, which means they're never in the wrong. So he's comparing them like this on purpose and basically sarcastically saying that the only difference between them is the way that they say that they're perfect. But though many private persons think almost as highly of their own infallibility as that of their sect, sect has come up twice now. Sect is just short for section. Section is what we call it now. So a sect is a section of a group. It's basically just like if you had a branch or a chapter of an organization, that's what a sect would be. But though many private persons think almost as highly of their own infallibility as that of their sect, few express it so naturally as a certain French lady, who in a dispute with her sister said, "I don't know how it happens, sister, but I meet with nobody but myself that's always in the right. Il n'a que moi qui a toujours raison." So he's quoting this French person here, but basically, he's saying here, most people think that their opinions are the best, infallible, they are perfect. But this French person said it best to her sister. And this French phrase here, il n'y a que moi qui tu as toujours raison. Basically, there is no one like me who is always reasonable. No one is always reasonable and logical the way that I am. She's basically saying pretty much what she said here in English. I meet with nobody but myself that's always in the right. So he's trying to tell you that this is what most people think. And he's saying this to present the idea that even if he doesn't agree with everything that's in the Constitution the way it is right now, he thinks that there are some good ideas that are very important to have in there. And he thinks that he might change his mind about some of the things that he currently doesn't agree with. So he's acknowledging that the things he doesn't like might still be good in this first paragraph. So then we have the second one. In these sentiments, that means like feelings or expressions, sir, I agree to this Constitution with all of its faults if they are such, because I think a general government necessary for us, and there is no form of government but what may be a blessing to the people if well administered, and believe farther that this is likely to be well administered for a course of years and can only end in despotism as other forms have done it before, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need despotic government, being incapable of any other. Okay, so this is a long sentence, right? So the first part is easy. He says, sir, I agree to this Constitution with all its faults if they are such. So he says, even if there are flaws in this document, I agree to the Constitution and I'm voting to make it official. And he says this is for a couple different reasons. He thinks that a general government is necessary for us. When he says us, he means the US, the colonies. And he says that there is no form of government but what may be a blessing to the people if well administered. So he's saying if a government is good, it'll be a blessing to the people. And he thinks that this government is likely to be well administered for a course of years. So he thinks that all the men who are gathered in that room, who are making the decisions, he basically thinks that everyone has the best ideas in mind and knows how to execute them. He pretty much is saying here that the only way this idea will go bad or end in despotism. So like if you're a despot, it means that you're like a very cruel, awful ruler. So he thinks that it can only end in despotism like other forms of government have before it, when the people shall become so corrupted as to need that government. So he's saying he thinks this will be good as long as the people are committed along with the people who are in government for it to continue to be good. I doubt, too, whether any other convention we can obtain may be able to make a better constitution. So he says they've met so many times because this is not the first constitutional convention. They've met, I think, 3 or 4 times at this point. So he doesn't think that meeting more will make it better. For when you assemble a number of men to have the advantage of their joint wisdom, you inevitably assemble with those men all their prejudices, their passions, their errors of opinion, their local interests, and their selfish views. So he's talking about what comes together when you bring people together, right? So you get the best and the worst of those people when they're all gathered in one room. From such an assembly, can a perfect production be expected? It therefore astonishes me, sir, to find this system approaching so near to perfection as it does. And I think it will astonish our enemies who are waiting with confidence to hear that our counsels are confounded like those of the builders of Babel, and that our states are on the point of separation, only to meet hereafter for the purpose of cutting one another's throats. Okay. So this is a chunk here. We're almost halfway through the paragraph at this point. So when he says, from such an assembly can a perfect production be expected, he's saying that it part of the reason why he doesn't think they should continue meeting is because when you get people together and you want their ideas, you're getting all the good and bad of their ideas. And because of that, you can only try to get the best version of what everyone is proposing, but there are going to be flaws. This will never be a perfect document, but they just need to focus on the things that they do agree on and the way that they agree on them. If they make compromises to appease one another, that's not perfect, but it is agreeing to try to meet a goal together. And then he says that it's close enough to perfection, even if it has flaws, that it will astonish or surprise, shock our enemies. So he's talking about Britain here. So he talks about how they are waiting with confidence to hear that our councils means groups or meetings, are confounded. Confounded means confused or chaotic, like those of the builders of Babel. So he's referencing the Bible here. The Tower of Babel is a tower mentioned in the Bible where everyone can understand each other while they are in the tower. So if you are not familiar with the lesson from Christian faith or that particular story, basically after Adam and Eve left the garden and they started creating humans to populate the earth, everyone sort of scattered to different lands and started speaking different languages. So there was an issue where they were unable to understand each other when they got together because they spoke different languages from the different lands they came from. And the Tower of Babel was supposed to be a place that was like a shrine where everyone would be able to talk to one another. And it was basically blessed with that ability. There's other things that happen with it in that story, but that's what he's referencing. He's saying that the British think that they're going to be as chaotic as how everyone was building the Babel Tower when they still couldn't understand each other. And that the states are on the point of separation, only to meet hereafter for the purpose of cutting one another's throats. So that's pretty self-explanatory. He's saying he thinks it's obvious that Britain isn't expecting them to be able to work together and that they think the states are going to turn on each other. So they're going to be shocked when they find out that we're able to pass the Constitution. Thus, I consent, sir, to this Constitution because I expect no better and because I am not sure that it is not the best. The opinions I have had of its errors, I sacrifice to the public good. So this is important. What he says here is he doesn't think it's going to get any better. And he's saying that he thinks it's pretty good. He thinks that it might be the best compromise, even if there's stuff in it that he doesn't want. And then he says, the opinions I've had of its errors, I sacrifice to the public good. So he recognizes that it is important for people to vote for the things they want in the Constitution. He doesn't have to agree to every single thing that's in there, but what's important is that the voice of the people is actually a part of what's going on. I have never whispered a syllable of them abroad. Within these walls they were born, and here they shall die. So he's talking about his opinions. He's saying he's not going to talk about what he thinks about the parts he doesn't like. He doesn't want to make it so that people doubt how good it is. He thinks that his opinion has a lot of weight and that it's important for people to know that it's okay to compromise with people who have a different view than you, especially because in a democratic system, you want every voice to be heard. If the majority votes for something that you don't want, the idea is you're supposed to accept it because it's fair to allow everyone to vote and decide what's happening. If every one of us, in returning to our constituents, that means people who elected them for their positions, were to report the objections he has had to it and endeavor to gain partisans meaning people who fall on one side or the other. So people who approve in this case or don't approve of the Constitution. So endeavor to gain partisans in support of them. We might prevent its being generally received and thereby lose all the salutary effects and great advantages resulting naturally in our favor among the foreign natures as well as among ourselves from our real and apparent unanimity. So what he's saying is, if all the men in the room for the convention were to go back home to the people who elected them and start, like talking down or saying bad things about the Constitution because there's stuff in it that they don't like, it would prevent the people from perceiving the good things that are in it well. And the nation might even fall apart over people nitpicking all these small details, trying to get it perfect, instead of everyone benefiting from being able to just agree to pass it and accept it. And then he mentions favor among foreign nations. So basically, there have been foreign nations that were supporting America becoming independent at this time. But if it seems like the US or America there's a lot of infighting, if it seems like they're not going to be able to agree on what policies are good for itself, it's kind of like making a bad bet, right? The French and the Spanish and some other nations contributed like funds and weapons and stuff to Americans to help them win the war. So you don't want to lose that goodwill just because you're nitpicking over the fine print, is basically what he's saying. So he thinks that instead of going off and telling people his opinions about the things he doesn't like, that they should all just come together and pass this because it is good enough and there's a little bit of what everyone wants in it, which he thinks is perfect for them, instead of trying to force everyone to believe one thing or the other. Much of the strength and efficiency of any government is in procuring, that means securing or getting, like acquiring, taking, owning, and securing, that means being able to like maintain, to hold down on. Happiness to the people depends on opinion of the general opinion of the goodness of the government, as well, I think that's repeating, as well as of the wisdom and integrity of its governors. So they're saying the strength and efficiency. Efficiency is your ability to do things quickly and well. So the strength and efficiency of any government and being able to get and keep happiness to the people depends on what the public thinks about their government, and about the wisdom and integrity. Integrity is like trustworthiness, whether or not someone has like a morally good background, the reputation, the positive reputation, basically, of its governors. So I hope, therefore, that for our own sakes, as a part of the people, and for the sake of posterity, posterity is like a enduring goodness over generations in the future, we shall act heartily and unanimously in recommending this Constitution, if approved by Congress and confirmed by the conventions, whenever our influence may extend, and turn our future thoughts and endeavors into the means of having it well administered. So that part kind of speaks for itself. He's hoping that because the governors that are there are also people who want to see certain things passed, and want to see the future of the nation be great, that everyone else will take the logic that he's presenting here, which is that it shouldn't have to be perfect to pass, and that the fact that there are things that maybe one or two people dislike in there doesn't mean that it's not a good Constitution. He's hoping that everyone will take the same logic that he has and set things aside, so that they can pass this, because he thinks it's good and that it's what their nation needs, and so that it can be administered well or in a good way, so that it'll help the people. On the whole, sir, I cannot help expressing a wish that every member of the convention who may still have objections to it will with me on this occasion doubt a little of his own infallibility, and to make manifest our unanimity, to put his name to this instrument. So this is the official call. He wants everyone to be like him and to be a little more flexible and not assume that he's 100% correct on everything, and that other people might have things to say that are also valid, that they might not agree with, but that are still good, so that they can sign this and pass it. So pretty much a more official, I'm asking you, as opposed to just presenting the idea of everyone doing things for the greater good. Okay. So now that we've finished this, we're going to come over to slide 7. And we get this analysis. Now, this is really the last part, honestly. This is fairly short. Benjamin Franklin speaks a little more plainly than some other people during this time period. So even though he uses, like big words, if you take the time to look them up while you're reading, that basically helps clear things up, at least for Benjamin Franklin's writing. Some of the other people who wrote things during this time period are a little more difficult to understand. Now, the analysis, we're just going to read over it just to help solidify things that we said, right? Franklin's purpose in this speech was to convince members of the convention to approve the Constitution. He contends, that means like argues or puts forward, that governments depend mostly on high quality leaders from a unified population. Therefore, he argued, his audience should not impede or prevent, they tell you what impede means here, it means prevent, the new government from forming because some delegates think it's imperfect. Instead, the delegates should unite and support the Constitution and focus on managing the new government efficiently and productively. That is almost exactly what we read directly just from the text. Many of the major literary contributors to this Age of Reason were political figures. So people who were writing this sound, logical stuff for the public to read were political figures. And then they list some of these writers. So we have Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and Thomas Paine. They not only articulated their ideas in writing, articulated means to write like precisely with precise words in their ideas in writing, but they also took action through use of their political positions and connections. Their public achievements helped their ideas come to fruition. So they were, in a way, like the first politicians, using their connections and their speeches and the way that they phrased things to try to convince others of supporting what they were doing. So we have many of the major literary contributors to the, same paragraph. The impassioned political atmosphere in the American colonies inspired not only public speakers and persuasive writers, but also fiction writers and poets. These authors employed their own creative literary mediums to convey thoughts and opinions on the exceptional changes occurring in America. So they're basically just telling you here that everyone being so passionate about America being separated from Britain definitely influenced fiction writers, so people who even wrote things that were not strictly real. Some people did make up stories about political things that were happening in the time to try to get across different ideas or to make politics a little more entertaining for people. And all of these speeches and things that were recorded were parts of the things that inspired them to do that. That is pretty much just this whole first section. So I'm going to stop sharing. So yes, I hope that was helpful. I am sorry for students who are watching this in the future if the link is not working. Like I said, I did contact Edmentum so that we can get that link replaced ASAP. Sometimes URLs change over the years, or they get updated when websites get updated, or they move resources from one page to another because now they have like more information up. That sort of thing happens regularly. We try to keep on top of it. So it should be up soon. If you're one of the students clicking on it and that it's not working now, I'm sorry, but I hope that having the text up while I was reading helped you take notes on it. Feel free to rewind this and pause, go back so you can continue to take notes. And if you're having a really rough time, go ahead and schedule a tutoring session with one of the tutors, myself, Kathy Bahovic, or Jen Papp. And we'll see what we can do to get you links. We'll go over it with you in person and make sure that you understand everything. But that's about it for me. This is Miss Amber signing off. And good luck with the rest of your English class.